and help to lead them. And so the central issue of foreign policy today is this balance between making sure that we're not trying to do more than we can and ensuring that we're not doing less than we should. And where that really comes to play, for example, is this debate on foreign aid, where on the one hand, I think there's been this perception created in this country that foreign aid is 20% of our budget, when in fact it's a very small percentage. On the other hand, our foreign aid has to make sense. And you touched upon it a moment ago about foreign aid going to countries that are corruptly using it, and so we got to make sure that our foreign aid is furthering our national interests. So what I hope you would help me with, because in your testimony you alluded to President Obama's vision for the world, and in the 2 years I've been here, I've struggled to fully understand what that vision is. If you go through the different countries, Russia's been mentioned. You know, the situation there has deteriorated as Russia and its leadership have made the decision that they want to recapture some of the Cold War stature that they had, and the best way to do that is to be confrontational with us. We had a hearing yesterday on Libya. What we didn't get a chance to talk about is how U.S. policy towards Libya in the Gaddafi conflict created many of the conditions that led to the attack on the consulate. A weak government, the forming of these militias, is all the product of an extended, protracted conflict where the U.S., once it made its decision to get involved, and we can debate whether we should have gotten involved or not, but once it made their decision to get involved, got involved in the early stages and then turned the rest of it over to our allies who simply didn't have the capability to bring that conflict to a quick conclusion, and as a result created the weak government and the situation that we face there. We've repeated that in Syria, where again we can debate whether it was in our national interest or not to get involved. As Iran's best friend, as the Grand Central Station for terrorists all over the world, I think it was in our national interest to help an opposition form and organize itself. We've been so disorganized in our involvement in Syria that now we're at a point where the opposition in Syria, when they win, and they will win, are just as angry at us as they once were at Russia and China and the other nations, and Iran and other nations that stood with Assad. We go to Latin America, where on the one hand, in 2009, the administration condemned what happened in Honduras, which is debatable, whether that was a coup or not. On the other hand, they stole an election in Nicaragua. I had to hold up a nomination here just to get a strongly worded statement out of the administration. We move over to the Middle East, where Israel, quite frankly, has been concerned, whether they admit it publicly or not, that for the early years of the administration, they were more focused on the Palestinian question as the biggest issue in the Middle East, when in fact the biggest issue in the Middle East is that Iran wants a nuclear weapon so they can attack Israel and potentially other nations. As we talked about Iran, in 2009, the people of Iran took to the streets in defense of the principles that we say we stand for, and the President of the United States says we're not going to interfere in their sovereignty. That totally demoralized the opposition. North Korea today announced that they're developing a weapon that can reach the United States of America. And lest anybody accuse me of being overly partisan here, I think the Bush administration was wrong to remove North Korea from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, and I hope we'll reverse that. And finally, China and the territorial conflicts that are going on in Southeast Asia and throughout the region. China's being increasingly aggressive about their territorial claims, and their neighbors are looking to the United States and U.S. leadership as a counterbalance. We talk about, and I think, I congratulate the President for talking about pivoting to Asia, but if this sequester goes through, what are we going to pivot with? And so these are the fundamental issues that we face, and I guess my question to you is, as you sit with the President and as part of his cabinet help him form a vision for the world and for the U.S.'s role in the world over the next few years, what advice are you going to give him in terms of what the U.S.'s role should be and what how that should be reflected in our foreign policy?
Well, Senator, that's obviously a very broad and comprehensive question, and I appreciate...
You have 2 minutes to answer it.
Well, I mean, I could say to you, look, let's sit down and talk about it, and we'll get together and go through it. But let me just give you, I want to do that, but let me say a few things to you about this. As you know, there was a debate, as there was in Congress, about whether or not anything should have been done in Libya. And the President moved, and the President decided that he was going to become engaged through NATO in ways that met our interests, I think, at the time, and got the job done. I thought it was smart. I thought the way he approached that was, in fact, very effective. And the results, obviously, were exactly what we wanted to achieve. We could tell that if we did this, then, and Senator McCain, you were deeply involved in that, we recommended no-fly, we pushed for certain things, and those things were put into place. And it was effected without American boots being put on the ground at a time where we'd just come out of Iraq and we have American soldiers, the largest number, in Afghanistan. And so I think the American people approved of the way in which that was handled. Now, the aftermath of all of these places, I ask every member of the committee, we need to spend some time on this, all of us. There is a monumental transformation taking place. This is the biggest upheaval in that part of the world since the Ottoman Empire, since it came apart. And as all of us know, many of the countries' lines drawn were drawn in relatively arbitrary fashion, and people were put in places of power as the sort of vestige of a period of colonial enterprise and of that war. It is a highly sectarian, divided, tribal part of the world. And I'm not sure that every policy has always been as sensitive or thoughtful about that as it perhaps ought to be.
Because I know my time is up, I just want to clarify on my statement about Libya. I was not suggesting that the U.S. should have invaded or put soldiers on the ground. We did certain things in the first 48 to 72 hours of that conflict. Had we extended that for a couple of weeks, that conflict would have ended a lot sooner. And I think in hindsight, a shorter conflict there would have certainly led to a government that would have been stronger and less instability than what exists.
Well, Senator, it might have, honestly, it might have or it might not have. There's no way, you know, Gaddafi had patched together a remarkable sort of, mixture of various tribes. And he'd cut deals over time with all those tribes. And those tribes had created their sort of tiers of power structure, which was the reason that you had a revolution. And the revolution sought to, give more people more opportunity and change. It's going to take time. It took us a while. We went from Articles of Confederation to a Constitution. And finally, through the Constitution, we went through a lot of upheaval, including a civil war, because of the things that were written into the Constitution before they were written out. So we need to be sort of thoughtful about the history and the culture and the nature of the places that we're dealing with. And you can't just take an American concept and plunk it down, or a Western concept and plunk it down and say, this is going to work. So all I'm advocating for is to be thoughtful about this. I think there is a struggle that is going to go on while we are here, while I'm Secretary and you are Senators. There is a struggle going on for the minds of people in many parts of the world. I believe we can do a better job, frankly, of galvanizing people around the values and ideas that we have organized ourselves around. But we have to do it, I think, in a lot of different ways. And one of the things, and I don't have all the answers to this as I sit here today, but there's a new media, there's a new, there are alternative means of communication bringing people together. There are other avenues. I'll give you one. Prince Ghazi of Jordan and King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia have been engaged in an interfaith initiative. I was privileged to speak at a meeting of an offshoot of it at Yale University a couple of years ago, where there were 68 mullahs, imams, grand mufti, ayatollahs who came, and there were 68 evangelicals who were there. And this meeting, sought to try to find some of the commonality of the Abrahamic faiths, which is there. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to explore, so that, as I said in my opening, we cannot afford a diplomacy that is defined by troops or drones or confrontation. We have to find a diplomacy that achieves understanding, rapprochement, whatever you want to call it, through other kinds of fora and initiatives.